Before we get going, we'll open a word of prayer. Any urgent prayer requests tonight? All right, let's go to the Lord in prayer again. Father, we thank you for this time together. Thank you for each one here and their desire to learn more about your word. Guide and direct us now with thy Spirit. Help us to comprehend and at least get a glimpse of what it looked like 3,500 years ago. When you're in control, and that's the whole key here, it's your sovereignty over the nations, the kings, their pawns. All of these individuals are nothing but instruments to move your program along. And so, Father, it's exciting to see. We look forward to that day when we can see you face to face and say thank you for all the wonderful things you've done in each one of our lives. Pray for our sister tonight and this fellow that needs a heart transplant. Again, it's in your control and care. We thank you that you've given the science and the doctors the ability and the wisdom to do such things today. And so if it's your desire, we know that you'll prolong this individual's life, and so we commit him to you. Guide and direct now our time together in Christ's name, amen. All right, so if I don't speak up, and I know this is a terrible room for acoustics, obviously, and so I'll try to keep speaking up for you. Anyway, so if we could hit the light switch right there for you, brother. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, hit one of those. There, we can see a little bit better. We talked last week about the key elements of where Israelites were, and two references in the book of Exodus mentioned two cities, Exodus chapter 1, Pithon and Pi-Ramesses, and we went into a little bit of detail about them. We'll go over them just a little bit again tonight. But again, things like this, that's Exodus chapter 1, verse 11, as I continually mention, the Bible just doesn't mention space, places, people, because he doesn't know what to say. He wants to make the book bigger. As I may mention, there's over 2,000 cities in the Bible. All of them have significance. And basically, it was telling you, I was there. There's a great book out by a fellow by the name of John Oswald, if you're interested, Myth in the Old Testament, where he goes, of course, the critical scholarship today says everything that we're looking at today is nothing but myths and legends that were developed down through the course of time. But anyway, he debunks very well the idea that the Old Testament is myth, mainly because it's so intertwined, the history and the theology, you understand? The history and theology are so intertwined, you cannot separate them. You cannot have theology without the historical context. And one of the questions that is posed to our students at the Liberty University in the class that I teach is, we ask is, can you trust a document, quote unquote, the Bible, to be reliable if there are historical errors in it? And it's always interesting to see the response as they have to post their ideas and arguments on it. And of course, I challenge them if they think otherwise. And of course, by the time they get done reading Oswald's book, their perspective has changed. Mainly because of the intertwinedness. You cannot separate the history from the theological. Specifically, as we start looking at the Exodus, look how many times almost every book in the Old Testament mentions, I am the God that brought you out of. And so if the Bible is historically inaccurate, then you have to ultimately say, what is your concept of who? God. What is he like, right? We always say God created the world. Yes, he did. But of course, the Bible could still have errors. But that doesn't make logical sense, does it? A God who can create the world cannot preserve and write a text accurately? Makes no sense. And that's one of the big questions I pose to them. If they challenge and say, yes, it's possible. Certainly, I mean, we have some great books that have been written. They have some great theological truths. But they're not basing them specifically on the character of who they are and that they are God, like the Old Testament is doing. So that's always the big question, is the presuppositions that individuals come when they look at the Old Testament and they look at even the historical Jesus, is can we trust it? And it's amazing to me the scholarship that will trust people like Levy to discern the history of Rome, you know. They quote Livy, and of course they quote Pausanias, and they quote Josephus, and they quote, you know, Cicero and some of the others down through history. But when it comes to the Bible, well, we have to be careful here. It's amazing phenomenon. But you can't, like I said, separate the two. And of course, specifically as we looked last week, year at Abraham. I mean, without Abraham, if Abraham's a myth or a legend, then what is Jesus Christ then? A brilliant, conceived story. I mean, you have to stop and think, were these writers sitting down saying, hey, let's make a convincing story for Jesus. Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Yeah, let's put him back there at the time of Abraham. Oh, wait a minute, what about Abraham? We don't know that much about him. Well, let's add some stories here. And it just, the mentality just wasn't like that. God wrote it, obviously, through the human writers, but through the process of inspiration. And it's a vital doctrine, no question about it. So even one of the cardinal orthodoxy, test of orthodoxy for Christians is the reliability of the Old Testament, of the Bible, and of course, ultimately, God. You got to stop and think about all the things that we're looking at. Christianity is the only ultimate logical explanation for the universe. If God is ultimately the pure logic, every other system falls apart. Did you know that? It falls apart somewhere. And you can tear it apart if you want to, if you know how to do it. It takes a lot of study and information, but it's possible, and there's some that have and are able to do that, like Francis Schaeffer, if you're interested in this stuff. But anyway, kind of fascinating. So by the time you get down to like Jeremiah and Isaiah, 800 years from Moses, they had to say, hey, we've got to make sure we line up with Moses. Yeah, what do you think? Okay, let's get Moses' books out here and let's look. Yeah, okay, we got to do this. It just doesn't make sense. But anyway, kind of fascinating. So all of these things are telling us that God was there. He interacted with time, interacted with people, and interacted with places. So tonight we're going to look at as we said, we move into the route of the Exodus and location of Mount Sinai. So I thought I would just throw some chilling pictures up there. That's what we got to look forward to come, January, right? Snow high as can be. Anyway, chill you down a little bit. It's been a hot summer and, of course, a very wet summer. All the mildew that's on my sidewalk and stuff.
Where's that at?
What? I don't know. Someone gave it to me years ago. I think it's up north. Obviously not. It's not in Florida, but anyway, yeah, it's quite impressive. A snowstorm. Well, we want to go to the route of the Exodus and then the location of Mount Sinai tonight. Again, all of these, we'll look at the information is quite particular. Even the route of the Exodus, it's not only given in the book of Exodus, but also given in the book of Numbers. So that's our topic tonight. Again, 2 books I would highly recommend. Wow, ugly color, but not on the screen. Anyway, this is the guy right there. His name is Hoffmeyer. You can buy both of his books, as I may mention about him many times. His latest book is Ancient Israel in Sinai. His earlier work is Ancient Israel in Egypt. All right, evidence for the authenticity of the traditions, wilderness traditions, and obviously the Exodus traditions in the Old Testament. So some great works. Well, we've been looking at the location of the Israelites. We left them off in the book of Genesis, and last week in the land of Goshen, we looked at some of the key cities surrounding that area and where this could have taken place. The land of Goshen, of course, as we look at the biblical indicator, seems to put it on the western side of the separation, or the lower part, or I should say the western side of what is today now the Gulf of Suez, and which would be, of course, the southeastern side of the Nile Delta. We looked at where Ramesses was in his major fort, and then looked at Pi-Ramesses and Pithom mentioned in the text. Anyway, of course, we looked at the very beginning of our class. We talked about the theology within the book of Exodus, the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, to the point that the last plague, of course, the death of the firstborn, really, of course, rocked the world of the Egyptians. And as I mentioned, there's no record of it in the Egyptian text, and obviously as no Pharaoh is going to tell you that he had his derriere kicked and he lost. They're not going to post those kind of elements in their inscriptions. But again, that's a major contrast with the biblical Word of God, where you do have records of the falls and misplacements and mishandling of individuals and great leaders like David all the way down through. But anyway, this is, of course, a schematic, a nice overlay map of the region, the land of Goshen, and then what we know in ancient times as the Bitter Lakes up in this area here, the Bitter Lakes, and then as they moved most likely south all the way into the area of Sinai. All right. Anyway, in Deuteronomy 8:15, as they eventually, of course, are as we have the last or the second law, we have this great statement of which we'll look next year at the wilderness wanderings in the book of Numbers and get into the book of Deuteronomy a little bit and probably get into the book of Joshua. He makes this statement in Deuteronomy 8:15. He led you through the great and terrible wilderness, I should say, with its fiery serpents, it says, and scorpions, thirsty ground, where there's no water. He brought forth water out of the rock of flint. Deuteronomy 8:15. Brought water out of the rock of flint, which is an interesting story when we get to next year. What about Moses in striking the rock? What about Moses in striking the rock? What was he doing there? How did he know to strike the rock when and water would come forth, compared to what God told him to say was to speak to the rock? The Bedouin lifestyle. Anyway, this gives you a little idea of what the wilderness in Sinai is like, all right? Not very conducive to living, obviously. Anyway, we talked about the caravan routes last year of migrating down into Egypt, as we saw with the story of Jacob. Due to famine and drought, his whole family moved down into Egypt. We do have pictures and reliefs in several tombs showing you Asiatics coming down into Egypt, mainly because, as we made mention, the impact of Egypt, it has always been the breadbasket of the ancient world, because the Nile, just like clockwork, floods and it produces rich soil as it brings in for cultivation. And if you look at any Google Earth diagram, all of the civilization, of course, is close to the Nile River, the source of life. Anyway, these are Asiatics moving down into Egypt. And of course, it had a constant influx of individuals from all over the Mediterranean world, even as far back as 14th century BC. We have an inscription from Amosis, there we go. Amosis the first, talking about raiding parties coming from Crete and from Greece and Cyprus, where they would put their ships out alongside cities and then send raiding parties into the land and steal the women and children. Wow, as early as the 14th century, even before that. We talked about even last week the impact of the Cretians on the palace complexes there in Egypt, showing you some significant frescoes from that region. Anyway, the Israelites, of course, are going to exit out of Egypt, and we'll get to that in a moment, but we need to be familiar with the word Sinai. Notice it's 37 times mentioned in the Bible. Its origin, the word Sinai, is still uncertain, but we have a significant text from Ain Sukkah that talks about a port west coast of the Red Sea port, and which has a phrase similar to the word Sinai. Here is another word in Egyptian, kind of like Biz, talking about the mining country in Sinai. And then we have some very significant references if you're interested in it. By the way, just again to remind you of what's available out there, and I'll get it started and come back to it. But there's a great program. It's called Logos. I don't know if I mentioned it in my first class or not. But where you can look up all these references, as well as a huge library of Egyptian and Mesopotamian text, and you can compare the phrases yourself. But nonetheless, it is recorded in the... But anyway, there's one of the most significant early Egyptologist is a guy named Gardner, who has his translations of many Egyptian texts that have been found, is the standard translation, does mention the word. But anyway, the name Sinai specifically probably, as we can determine in the biblical text, when the Israelites move out, refers to the southern part of the region. But anyway, Sinai has always been, as you can see, even for Egypt, a land bridge between Africa and Asia. To get into Egypt, of course, you have to cross through parts of Sinai. And unless you're taking a ship or a boat along the coast, even then you have to, at times, touch part of the Sinai to probably rest and sleep for the night if you're not traveling through the evening. Also, the Sinai was always rich in copper, in turquoise. And probably next lesson, I'll take you over to the copper mines over near, they're called Solomon's quarries today, but basically they were mined by the Egyptians from earlier times, way back 500 years before Solomon. Anyway, interesting to note that Sinai in Egyptian literature was not considered a part of their country. So the Sinai region, it's fascinating to explore, no question about it. And of course, if you can't, I don't think it's highly recommended to go there today. As I told you, they've even shut down the famous St. Catherine's Monastery. And let me turn off this side over here. Turn off the sidebar. But anyway, there's Sinai. It's kind of a triangular shaped. It was in the hands of the Israelis, and of course, you know, after the Six-Day War in the 80s, they gave it back to Egypt. And there you can see the yellow line is the border today between, well, not very clear up here, but near Gaza is the borderline between Israel and Sinai. And there are still some good oil reserves, specifically down in the southern part of the region, which Israel has made a contract with them when they gave it back that they would always get this certain price for it. And I'm not sure exactly how much it supplies to the nation of Israel today, but it does have some oil reserves. So anyway, there's Sinai region. We talked about this, I think, last year, so I'm not going to go into great detail about it, but it is divided north in half, and it's got a huge uplift, specifically in its southern part of the peninsula, where you can reach heights of over 8,000 feet. So even in wintertime, obviously, that elevation does bring snow into this region. And periodic rains, which do collect in reservoirs under the ground. And as I was mentioning to you about Moses, Bedouin know how to find water in the desert. They know how to find it. Because there are places, like I said, huge reservoirs that collect. You just got to know what to look for. And you can figure out if a rock has, you know, water in it, basically, because of what grows on the outside of it, right? Usually if it's damp underneath, what are you going to get on the outside of rocks in the ground? Vegetations and algae and all that kind of things. So stop and think that with Moses. Of course, how long did he wander out in the wilderness with his family's flock? 40 years. And do you think he knew how to find water? I bet he did. I bet he did. And knew just how to hit the rock so that the water comes forth. Anyway, so there's the area of Sinai. And you, like I said, with Sinai, you can zoom right into the mountains. I mean, and then you get 3D perspective if you got a good computer. But I mean, I just love playing with it. Look at that one. Zoom. It's better on my screen, better on your screen, obviously. But anyway, you can see all the terrain. It's just an amazing tool. Thanks, Google. So the borders of the Sinai, obviously today is the Gulf of Suez. And you ought to just, if you're interested in history as well, I mean, look at the digging of that canal, mainly done by Greeks. They got some old pictures how they were digging that canal, quite amazing. And then, of course, you have the desert itself, and then, of course, the Red Sea, which is, of course, called the Gulf of Aqaba. Of course, the Red Sea splits into half at the southern part. The Red Sea, which is its name today, on the western side, and then the Gulf of Aqaba on the eastern side, where Solomon had some shipping industry, specifically in the northern part here at Ezon Geber. Through Sinai, there are three major routes that we know of recorded in history. One is the sea route, which of course takes you along the coast, where you can go from Gaza, Israel, all along the coast, all the way down into Egypt. There's also mentioned in the Bible the way of Shur, the way of Shur. And then there's another highway called the Pilgrim's Road, the Pilgrim's Road. Both of these, of course, have been used down through history and are used today. As you can see, this is a famous painting by David Roberts in his illustration of the ancient world, showing you Bedouin camping out in the Sinai desert. The northern boundary is a unique brook mentioned 10 times in the Old Testament. You can't see it specifically on the maps I'm giving you, but you can zoom right in it, and you can see it on this map. Right there is a brook, a river, that collects from another uplift in the north and then drains all the way out to the Mediterranean Sea, and it's called, as you see here, the modern city, Arish. This is a riverbed. Remember I told you in Hebrew it's called a nahal, and in Arabic it's called a wadi. And today, of course, you can see this picture was taken when there was not much rain, and so there's no water specifically in fact, they've got it channeled nowadays to collect and use water for the settlement, Arish, which today is in Egyptian hands. All right? Anyway, this is a major brook. Some people think this is the brook of Egypt, and it probably is. There are no geographical indicators, specifically outside of what's in the Bible, and it's not that clear exactly where it's at. But the Bible, of course, says very carefully to Abraham that I will give you as far as the river Euphrates to the brook of Egypt. It makes the same promise to Solomon. Where the brook of Egypt is, it's hard to tell. But most likely it could be this wadi, which seems to separate very nicely this riverbed, Israel from the Sinai Peninsula and then all the way down to Egypt. So this would be the coastal road. The way of Shur takes you a little bit more inland, and then there's inland, more of a little bit more to the south, and then the Pilgrim's Way was basically a direct cut right across the northern part of the Sinai. So, and we'll show you some pictures of that, what it looks like. Anyway, this is I don't know how far Moses got up into the northern Sinai. Most likely he spent most of his time down in the southern Sinai and over here in Midian. Remember, Midian is on the eastern side of the Red Sea. All right? But he did make his way across several times, I am sure. There is what it looks like from the ground. I've never been there. This is a friend of mine's shot. Picture taken back over 15 years ago, but this is what the modern village looks like today. This is looking north, or looking east, I should say, and that's looking north. But you can see the riverbed here. Again, no rain presently, so the riverbed is dry. And basically most of Egypt, outside of some of the modern cities, are basically just your third world country looking towns, although there are some resorts in some of these places that give some life to it. Well, we also have the Pilgrim's Way, and you can see here even this picture, camels transporting, how was it? Transversing, that's what I was looking for. Going across. Just like they've done for thousands of years. I told, of course, if you go down to St. Catherine's Monastery, the Bedouin there give you camel rides into, and they all were lamenting that they had to sell their camels just to, because they couldn't afford to keep them. $87 a month to feed a camel is what they said in the news. I was reading it this afternoon, and so they couldn't afford to keep it. And so they're not sure once the tourism lets up what happened. Why they shut it down is that they said some monk was going down to Sinai, and he was almost captured by Arab extremists, and so they told St. Catherine's to shut down. It hasn't been shut down that often since it was built back in the 5th century AD. But anyway, this is going through the Thai region a little bit to the south, as we'll see in a moment. So, ladies, gear up, huh? Here we go. And as desert life is all not that grand, I would imagine, huh? Tough life. But it's manageable, obviously. Manageable, because the children of Israel, of course, with divine help, with manna from heaven and the fowl, the birds, were able to make a living down in this region. Other Bedouin dwellings along the way, and the population, from what I understand, of Bedouin living in the desert is up to close to 5,000 to 6,000. So quite a number, mainly in Egypt, obviously, up to, bordering on the city of Gaza. But that's what the life looks like in this region. Some of the other gateways, like this one, Wadi al-Sheikh, you can see very carefully through the mountainous regions, you've got passes that allow you to connect and to go different directions. All of this, of course, is heavily studied on Google Earth. You can actually still see the ancient trails. Basically, the mountains have not changed in the past thousands of years. So the trails that they used back then are basically the trails they use today. This is central Sinai, called Wadi al-Akar, joining the Wadi al-Sheikh before one of the possible 7 locations of Mount Sinai called Jebel Sirbal. Jebel Sirbal. And you can find that on Google Earth as well. Just type it in. In fact, everything's on Google, right? Just type in how many mountains have been identified with Mount Sinai. You get a list, go to images, you'll get some of the stuff that I borrowed off the internet. You know, there it is, all there for you. And it's amazing. And you get some great pictures like this as well. Although this one is taken by a friend of mine, Todd Bullen. Or Richard Cleaves, I'm sorry. And then you have southern Sinai near Jebel Musa, the mountain of Moses. And it looks like this. All along, in fact, you'll see in some of the areas you have nice oases, as I'll show you in a moment. But gives you an idea of the terrain of the Sinai, all right? Not very hospitable. Arid, obviously, most of the time. Winter, it does rain every once in a while, 1 to 2 inches, basically. But it does get snow, and the snow, of course, melts, and the water does get trapped in certain areas and creates oases. I think I told you when on my first trip back in 82 down in the Sinai, I'm still looking for the pictures. Anyway, our guide was an Israeli tank commander before they gave it back to the Egyptians, and he took us to an oasis, and it had a swimming pool. No joke, a cement swimming pool. And we said, how did this get here? He said, Arab drug runners. He says, we found it when I was a tank commander out here, and I've never forgotten. And so we had a nice swim in an oasis. And I can't find the pictures of that for some reason. Anyway. And then as you move all the way across to the Gulf of Eilat, this is Ezon Geber, or Eilat, where the Israelis on the western side and the Jordanians on the eastern side. This is where Solomon had his ships on the Red Sea at Ezon Geber. And you can see the mountains are still pretty high. This is the area just to the south of this picture is where the Solomon copper mines and turquoise mines are located. Anyway, this is Wadi Araba. This is the area that goes all the way up to the Dead Sea. But again, a visual image as what I tried to create, obviously, so that as you start reading and someone mentions Sinai, if you don't get there, at least you gotta, if you don't forget before next Sunday, you've got some visual image of what the Israelites did for 40 years. And keep in mind, this is all Bedouin life. And this is going to add very significant information for when the Israelites come into the land of a land flowing with milk and honey. Because in the wilderness, what happened to the older generation? They all died off. Who was that? All your craftsmen, all your builders, all your mighty warriors. Although you wonder how the younger generation, there's not a whole lot of battles talked about in the wilderness wanderings. So when they come into the land of Palestine, you don't have the great build. They're all desert nomads. And they come into the land of Canaan and they say, look at these cities. What are they going to do? Tear them, burn them down, destroy them? In fact, the Bible only says only 3 cities were destroyed in the book of Joshua. Jericho, Ai, Hatzor. Only 3. It's not a mass scorch earth policy where they march through and destroy everything in their path. Just further from the truth. As you read the book of Judges, they recount the history. And they're still living in the mountains. Not able to come down to the valleys because the Canaanites are there with their chariots. But this helps explain one of the reasons why we don't find great archaeological information for why the Israelites did not, or of the Israelites themselves in the land of Canaan during the time period that we suggest, because basically they assumed and took over a lot of their cities. Like I said, only 3 cities are mentioned to be destroyed. And this calls for a very careful study of the text, specifically looking at words that say destroy, that say leveled with a sword, ideas along those lines. Some words are very specific. It doesn't mean they leveled the city. It means they kicked them out and they assumed. In fact, the Israelites, they're not even great skilled craftsmen as far as making ceramics for pottery. The Canaanites were exquisite in this material. And so what are they going to do? Smash the Canaanites' pottery and say, I'm not using this stuff? No, they used it. So the transition, as we'll see next year, sorry you have to wait that long, if you come back, the transition between the Israelites and the Canaanites is very minimal. You can't see much. There are some evidence, obviously. We'll talk about that. But in the ceramics, which is one of the major indicators we use as archaeologists, it's just not there. Certain things, but by and large on the whole. But anyway, desert nomads. And so within the different areas, like this one down near Mosquito Beach, we have remains of ancient inhabitants that lived out there in these round, like dolmen type huts. Quite amazing. Not too far. It's in Israel. You can go see it yourself. Oh, no, you can't. I'm sorry. This is in Egypt. But the shot I took years ago. And other settlements are down in the desert with oases like these date palms and palm trees in this region. So it's a fascinating world, obviously, and one that is very interesting. Well, let's talk about the Exodus geography, all right? Again, there's not, the cities are mentioned. It's very difficult, but the geography descriptions of the Exodus offer, therefore, empirical, I believe, test to the historicity. Go back to what I said at the very beginning of the class. All of these references to cities, places, he's telling you, I was there. He knew that in 2015 that scholars would be questioning whether God even exists. He said way back then when Moses was writing, I believe, the Pentateuch, back in 1500 BC, he said, put that city in there. Let's write that down. Put this city in here. Put this city in here, because I'm going to tell them 3,500 years from now that I was there. You see what I'm saying? Because like I said, history and theology are intertwined. So they give us an empirical test. Now keep in mind, as I constantly repeat, archaeology is not meant, I don't do archaeology to prove the Bible. I don't need to prove the Bible at all. That's God's job. I can't, no matter what I do to prove the Bible, if their heart is not changed, they're not going to believe it, right? The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And they say that repeatedly over and over again. There is no God, there is no God. I can't change their mind. Only God can do that. But it is an empirical test. Now keep in mind, all of the stuff that I find never strengthens my faith either. Faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. Archaeology doesn't increase my faith, because I've already forgotten some of the things I found years ago that I said, wow, look at this. It's getting pretty bad, ain't it? Anyway, So, second, examining the geographical movement of the Exodus offers the best method for ascertaining where is Mount Sinai. Did you know there are 7 possible, maybe 8 possible locations for Mount Sinai? Wow. And we thought we were going to find the 10 Commandments. Yeah, right. They got to be broken. He broke them. Did they collect them up and throw them away or just leave them there on the ground? Maybe they're still there, huh? I don't know. Anyway, kind of fascinating. Anyway, I talked about the major routes that come out of Sinai, and this is what it looks like. As I was telling you about the Way of Shur, the northern part, this is the caravan route, a little bit further south, and then up north along the Mediterranean Sea is the way of the Sea Road, also known, and it's mentioned in the Bible. In fact, Israel is told not to go this way, the way of the land of the Philistines. Now that's interesting because another interesting phenomenon, because the Philistines aren't there yet. You understand that? There's no Philistines inhabiting Gaza, Gath, Ekron, Ashkelon, Ashdod yet. They don't come till till the latter part, actually the beginning of the 12th century. We have a big inscription from Ramesses talking about defeating the sea peoples, as they're called. So what are you going to do about that reference of Philistines? They're not there yet. And also with Abraham, remember a guy named Abimelech? He was also called a Philistine. But we already saw that in 1600 BC at some of the capitals there of the Hyksos, they have Cretan mosaics, and Cretan and Greeks are most likely the part of the Philistines' characteristics or makeup. But nonetheless, kind of interesting. So here's all the different areas for where is Mount Sinai. Here's Jebel Karkun, Kardum. There's Jebel Sirta, Jebel Es Bishr, one of them. I mean, then of course the most popular one is Jebel Musa. Musa, of course, is the Arabic name for Moses, and then several others within this region. Even some put it all the way over in Midian. And maybe some of you have seen that guy's argument. His name is Robert Cornuke, and a guy by the name of, he's dead now, Ron Wyatt. Ron Wyatt and Bob Cornuke. Ron died, I don't know, 10 years ago. Robert Cornuke took over the institute, I think, of his, and he was one of these guys that crawled over into Jordan, dark of night, with night-seeing goggles, and said he found this big mountain, has black ash on it, and it looks like, you know, this could be the rock that Moses, that the calf was put on, all kinds of, but no archaeological excavations have ever been done on the site, and anyway, kind of bogus in my estimation. But nonetheless, some put it over in that region as well. Anyway, another site, Har Kokom, all the way up here. Jebel Hala, there you can see these all. I wish I could, perhaps this comes out of Hoffmeyer's book, but nonetheless pretty significant. Anyway, look very carefully, class. Exodus chapter 12 through 19 and Numbers chapter 33 lists all of the cities. You've had to read it if you're reading through the Bible. Are you reading through the Bible of course of the year? You read this a long time ago. Well, what did you do when you came to Exodus chapter 12, verse 13 through 19? And Numbers 33. Did you immediately recognize that what's found in Exodus is duplicated in Numbers chapter 33? Well, God did, of course, obviously. But here are all the cities listed for you. Wow. At least 15 cities and regions mentioned in the biblical text. And of course, you've had to read through those names, and you probably just said, man, I don't understand this, and pass it right on by. But again, what was God trying to do? You see what I'm saying? What was God trying to do? That's why, as I made mention, it gives us a very significant, the geography here gives us a very significant test for the reliability of the Old Testament. And by and large, some of these cities we know of, some we don't. It's still problematic. But nonetheless, by and large, we think we have a pretty good handle on it. I don't have time to go into all of it, but I would encourage you to buy Hoffmeyer's book, Israel in Sinai. But here you are. They departed from Ramses, recorded again in Numbers 33, to Succoth, a very popular name, by the way. Camped at Ethon at the edge of the wilderness. Then they turned back to the sea in front of Pi Hahiroth, between Migdal and the sea in front of Baal Saphron. Whoa! We know where some of these sites are. In fact, Hoffmeyer is digging in that region, or was digging. Anyway, for 3 cities, they turned back. They said God prohibited them from going the coastal route. He said, don't go that way. Why? Well, right away, these 3 cities are all Egyptian forts. And there's a ton of Egyptian forts protecting the caravan trade routes. Again, the Bible assumes you know all this. And now you do, because I just told you. All right. Wow, fascinating. They passed through the sea. What sea? Yam Suf. And from Yam Suf, point number 6, they went into the wilderness of Shur. 3 days' journey into the wilderness of Shur. And then they came to Marah. Bitter lakes, right? Bitter water. And then they came to Elam, 12 springs and 70 palms. That's a very interesting indicator, by the way. A lot of people think, it talks about the biblical text, 600,000 says came out of the Israel, and that was just men. Some people like to put the population at 2 million. Can't be done. I mean, there's not even 2 million. How many people live in Israel today? There's about 7.5 million, and they basically swallow up most of the country. You would definitely notice 2 million people. So we'll get to that. In fact, the Bible seems to suggest that they're few in number. We'll get to that in a moment. But here it says they all, in the biblical text, in this region too, it says the Israelites shaded themselves underneath the palm tree. Well, if you got 2 million people, that's like for 70 palm trees divided up by 2 million, everybody's under one little palm tree, 100,000 people? I don't think so. That makes sense. So numbers is a very fascinating game that people like to play with in the Old Testament, but we'll get to that in a moment. And then the wilderness of Sin. Oh, we like that, don't we? Wilderness of Sin. Which is between Elam and Sinai on the 15th day. Notice the phrase there. Between Elam and Sinai. That's why we put Sinai, the technical Sinai, as the southern part of that region. On the 15th day of the 2nd month. Again, he's even chronicling it for you. Wow. Even 15th day, where everything is spaced out. This brings down one of the theories of Cornuke, who says the Israelites fell into the Gulf of Aqaba, or the Egyptians were swallowed up by the Gulf of Aqaba. And you've seen, maybe, I've had some of you come to me and says, what about these chariot wheels that have been found in the Gulf of Aqaba? What chariot wheels? They didn't even pull it up. Oh, they found a piece of coral that looks round, looks like it got spokes. Who knows what it is? A kid's bicycle tire got thrown down in there. And they say, I get that all the time, at least once a month, if not more. What do you think about, that's old stuff. That was Ron Wyatt's find over 20-something years ago, and they've never gone back to even investigate. Anyway, kind of fascinating. Anyway, so they moved on to the wilderness of sin by stages. But look very carefully, there's a reference in Numbers 33, when we get to number 12, that's not referenced in Exodus. They camped at, as it says here, besides Dopka of above, but Alush, wherever that is. It's problematic. And then they camped at Rephidim, no water. The 3rd moon, they arrived in the wilderness of Sinai. The wilderness of Sinai. All geographical terms. Very descriptive. This, of course, as I made mention at the very beginning of this class, there are campaign lists written during this time period. There are pilgrimages. People wrote how they traveled, wherever they went. So this is one of those genres of encampments that are not uncommon during this time period in the list that is given. But this is very detailed. The 3rd new moon they came to the wilderness of Sinai. Wow. And then point number 15, set out from Rephidim, they came into and camped in the wilderness of Sinai, and camped before the what? Before the mountain. Notice how important are words. They camped before, it doesn't say a mountain, it says what? The mountain. It particularizes. So it is a specific place. It's not just any mountain, it's the mountain. Now what is interesting later on, you get to Elijah. Remember Elijah? Jezebel said boo, and he ran all the way down to Sinai, and he was in a cave, No, it says, and he was in the cave. Not just any cave, the cave. In the region of Sinai. A lot of people put it right where Moses received the Ten Commandments, or close by. So even the article is significant. Fascinating. All right, well, the Exodus journey. Here's the different routes. I'll try to, like I said, give you some of these maps if we can. Talk to Jim. But this is Goshen. They did not go north. They did not go the way of Shur, but it looks like they took a southern route. As I told you, the word Sinai, the region itself most likely pointing to the southern part. And they camped out in Sinai before the mountain. So we've talked about this slide before Ramesses, of course, Tel Kantur. Anyway, some things about Ramesses' place where they left. Ramesses abandoned the spot within 100 years, a little more after the incident, we think, of the, if you hold to an late date of the Exodus, which, again, problematic. We talked about that last week. What date do you hold? What Ramesses are we referring to? Anyway, what is interesting is that there is a place there, and it means beloved of Amud, where he talks about great victories, and this is all that's left today, 60 miles northeast of Cairo. And that would be at Kantir, which is right there, right there. And I had it marked. What is nice about Google Earth is that once you create your own map, anyway, so there it is on Google Earth. I told you can type in any one of the sites, like Kantir, there it is, and it's got the name Ramesses right beside it. So there's the site, one of the possible locations right there. And of course, it's swallowed up by some of the modern villages. Obviously, one of the big problems with archaeology. But it's pretty close to the way I told you, the exit out by this valley right here called Wadi Tumilit by Ismailia. Most likely right down this region. So there's Kantur, and there's possible locations for Pithon and Pi-Ramesses, Tel Mascuda, or the other sites. Other possible locations even outside of Kantur. Not real sure. So the Exodus 23, 29 through 30 claims that the Israelites, by the way, look very carefully, Exodus 23, 29 through 30, claims that the Israelites were so few in number as to be incapable of populating the land when they were destined to enter. So we're talking about the numbers of the Israelites. They're called, the word thousand is somewhat not problematic, but it has more than just the word thousand. It's the word Aleph, E-L-E-F, Aleph. It carries the idea not only of 1,000, but also the word unit. It can also mean clan. It can also mean tribe. So you have to take that into consideration. And then, of course, like I said, commenting on the numbers, there's several references, like I said, that they were small in number. In fact, even Deuteronomy 7:7, similar, talks about them as the smallest nation on the face of the earth. They are badly outnumbered by the inhabitants of the land. So, and that's Deuteronomy 7:7. Then if you go to the place where I showed you earlier about the palm trees, they rested, each one rested underneath the shade of the palm tree. Well, if it's 2 million, that's a big palm tree. Anyway, some nice pictures by David Roberts, again, showing you the Exodus and what the Israelites did. We talked about them making bricks there at Pi-Ramesses and Pithon. What the city must have looked like. Anyway, Pithon, of course, could be, as I told you, possible other locations, Tel Adaba. Anyway, all of these areas in this region. Pithon, not a part of the movement. It's not mentioned. It just says they worked there. But it also, we have a temple there to Atum, which is the Arabic word for Tumilit. Store cities are mentioned there. Anyway, the region associated with the god Atum. And it's mentioned in other papyrus, if you're interested. All of this, I told you, is in You know, it depends on how far you want to go. But all of this is located in Google Earth. Google Earth. All of this is located in Logos. So it's just a fascinating tool. Again, I tell you this not because my stuff is in there, and they treat me very nicely. But look what you can do. You can go to guides. So you want to go to a passage guide, exegetical guide, word study guide, go to passage guide. So there's like Exodus, the book of Exodus, chapters 1 through 15. Click go. Click go. And go. Anyway, you'll bring up everything within your library. And now, of course, within the cloud, they're going to put rental. You can rent all of their books, which they have 200,000. Use the app and do your Bible research. So there it is. It's starting to come up. Anything in your commentaries, any journals that you have, content, cultural concepts. I mean, it is so fast. It's not connecting well to the internet speed-wise, but it's so fast. Within seconds, you'll get all the information that is in your library, and you can go through it one by one, and you can search. Here's biblical events. I mean, it does all the work for you. You can find out what biblical places are mentioned there. Here's some of the biblical places. It's still searching biblical places, but all the Egyptian literature that I'm referring to, I have it all in my library, but you can too if you want to do that. But there's the ancient literature, ancient Near Eastern text relating to the Old Testament, and you just click on it, and you get the reference, and it's just, like I said, an amazing tool. And it's just really having a hard time connecting to the internet here, but anyway, you get the gist. Very, very nice. For Succoth, again, I'm just giving you some of the highlights. Exodus 12:37. We do have movement from Ramesses to Succoth in the southeastern direction. It's talked about as Ramesses comes chasing. If that's Ramesses, it comes chasing after them. Anyway, in Exodus 13:17, a very critical mark, they say, do not go the way of the Philistines, the way of Horus, the coastal highway, because it doesn't give them a reason, but we know why. Most likely because of all the Egyptian forts along that way. They would have had each one of those forts would have been after them. So anyway, we do think we know exactly what they're referring to, also in the same area of Wadi Tumuli. So that's this wadi right there I was telling you about, the riverbed, all in this area. Forts go all the way north. The Egyptians controlled the trade routes in this region. Ethon, as before they move into the Sinai, they set out to Succoth and camped at Ethon on the edge of the wilderness. Again, appears to be connected, as it says here, to the Egyptian word, which means the deity of Amun, which also fits in that same region along that major thoroughfare that connected the Wadi Tumilat that leads you out into the Sinai. And then in Exodus 14:2, he tells them to turn back, go back. So Israel, if you look very carefully, it says Israel's back. It's too close to where they came from. They talk about going back to Pi-Hahiroth, the opening in the mouth of the canal probably, that Wadi Tumilat. They have to pass Baal Saphron. Baal, of course, just means Lord of the waters. And then they have to pass Migdal, which it means fortress. And also another key site called, in that area where Hoffmeyer's been digging, the place called Tel El-Borg, the mansion of the lion. So what you have here then, the last phrase, that before they move into the Sinai, is the seed of reeds, Yam Suf. Look very carefully, again terms, Yam Suf. Much confusion, 24 times in the Bible. There is no other word for sea except for the word Yam, Y-A-M. This is Yam is sea, but Suf does not mean red. It means reeds. So what happened is that the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament around the 3rd century, late 4th century BC, translated it red. The Latin Vulgate, which was Jerome's translation into Latin, kept it. And hence it ended up into the King James as red. So all of you talk about the Red Sea. Red Sea. But Suf always means reeds or rushes. And it's used even in the Bible that way. Anyway, 5 different areas have been proposed for these various areas, from the Gulf of Suez all the way, as I told you, over to Aqaba on the eastern side. The Gulf of Aqaba is called by this term in 1 Kings 9:26. Why? Because it's an extension. And the context can give a broad or a small meaning of the text, but it doesn't seem to suggest that Israel was over there when they crossed. It's definitely a geographical term because, again, the article is placed there in the Bible. So read very carefully what the text says. It says the Yam Suf, not just Yam Suf, the Yam Suf. So he's referring to a specific sea of reeds, not just any sea of reeds, but the sea of reeds. They apparently knew what it was. We don't. All right? So as the Egyptian word is definitely from this region, from this word meaning reed. Anyway, it was a term known all the way back to the Ramesses period that we know of. So there's no warrant, I believe, for the idea that they crossed, that because Israel crossed the Sea of Reeds, that the water was so shallow that there was no miracle, some people suggest. How much water does it take to knock out a chariot? Not very much back in those days, because the chariots were not made out of iron. All of them made out of wood. So, a 3 or 4 foot wall of water can do what to a car? You saw what's happening out there out west already with the flash flooding. They got it all, take out a car. Anyway, like I said, the Hebrew only has one word for sea or lake. That's why it's called the Sea of Galilee. Well, it's not a sea. As you know, salty. It's a freshwater lake. But there's no word for lake in Hebrew. There's no word for ocean. Sea, right, is the word that's used. So be careful with that. So in Exodus 14:9, the Egyptians chased them after the horses, with all their horses and his horsemen, and they overtook them, camping by the sea, besides Pi Hahiroth, in front of Baal Saphron, and other geographical indicators. Again, Egyptian texts best locate these north in the region of what is known as the Lake Bala. All right? So this is where it probably is located. Today, of course, the Suez Canal has made a major obstacle for studying the terrain. It's changed everything, basically, in this region. Lakes have been dried up, lakes have moved, and so only through geological research, which has been very sporadic in this area, can we do tests to find out where these areas are. But anyway, this is what we do know. There are a string of Egyptian forts, and always have been. They're easily identifiable. Huba 1 and 2, El Borg, where Dr. Hoffmeyer has been digging, Migdal, another fort here, which question mark, but we think it is, and then Kuta and El Hur. All these sites have been identified around these major lagoons. All right, these lagoons. So it seems to suggest within the text that this is the route that they were camped out in this area here, turning back, and this is where as they were coming back, the Egyptians caught up with them, and then God opened up the lake, Sea of Reeds. They came through. Besides that, if you look very carefully, it can't, just by way of reference, all these nice passages, ancient literature, church fathers, Dead Sea Scrolls even got it, some of that passage of Exodus chapter 15, parallels, Old Testament references, it's loaded, all right? All your research is done for you. All you have to do, even hieroglyphs, some nice pretty pictures. Some I borrowed. Anyway, people and places. So it's a very powerful tool right there at your fingertips. Anyway, so we go back, as I said, to this area here. Bring up Google Earth. Take a look. So we're talking about this region right in here is where they camped out. And they had to come back through. It can't be the Red Sea here, if I can get hold of it, because this is deep. And they're cliffs. It's not like they jumped off the cliffs down into the Red Sea, then came up the other side. They have to have ladders, and that makes sense. Doesn't make sense. So we put it in this area right through here, but like I said, the Suez Canal has distorted a lot of it, but there are, as you can see, some remnants and he has a great detailed study. That map I showed you earlier was a reconstruction of the areas, so it makes it very difficult. But there were lakes here, no question about it. You have some of it still here, like Ismailia. Well, of course, this is brought in by the Suez Canal, but puts it right up in this area with all the forts that have been found. So anyway, that's the best we know. And it seems to suggest that the Israelites did not transfer all the way across to this Gulf of Aqaba. In fact, he puts the crossing of the Israelites, Cornuca, I was telling you about earlier, way down here. Subterranean islands. And he believes that you could create a series of stepping stones to cross, but still looks pretty problematic to me. But anyway, very problematic to get the chariots from way over here all the way down to here. You'd have to carry them because the chariots wouldn't last but about a week in this terrain, if that at all. So this is all the horsemen. So it's a very, 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 again, the indicator seems to suggest that the Bible is spot on. There are some other good articles. Just type in a fellow by the name of Gordon Franz, F-R-A-N-Z. He has some very significant articles on the Exodus, and of course, basically opposing Cornuc, putting it further to the southeast, but nonetheless. So you might want to check out Gordon Franz. So they move into the Sinai. It seems like they make a southern direction, and here is Wadi Faran. Look at the beautiful date palms. There's a little bit more than 70 there, but there are oases like this throughout the desert. So we'll pick up there next week, and I'll take you down to my last slide, and you'll just have to wait till next week to see it. There it is. Look at that. Oh, what a great shot. I wonder who took that picture. All the way up. You have to climb it. There's a sign about 1/3 of the way up. There's 886 steps left to go. If you have heart condition, or you're pregnant, please. But stop here. All right. Lord bless you. We'll see you all next week.